Hello, my name is Kevin Fanning, and today I'd like to show you how to take a model in Lightwave and blow it up. Um, Also, I'll be showing you how to add some emitters to some of the pieces, and then use hypervoxels to shade them and add color, and then add a little bit of camera shake, and we'll end up with something like this. Alright, so first we need to start in, go online. We need to plug in. You can get that at the Lightwave plugin database, lwplugindb.com. And when you get there, type in the search field down here in the lower left, CrackIt, R-A-C-K, space it, crack space it. And it'll come up here, and download the appropriate version for the Mac or PC, and open it up, save it into your modeler Lscripts folder, and we should be good to go. Alright, so minimize that, pop over to modeler. Okay, I'm going to be using just a cube, a box here today, so I'm going to activate basic box here. Okay, and to use the CrackIt plugin, we'll go to the Utilities tab, Lscript, and here it is, CrackIt. Okay, now I could just click OK right now and it'll go through and it'll break the model up into lots of nice little random pieces and put it back together, but it's going to look like it's broken when it's assembled. It's going to have gaps in between all of the pieces after it's reassembled. And I don't want my object to look like that before it gets blown up. You know, while it's sitting there, I want it to look like a smooth cube like this. So the gap setting right now defaults to 1 millimeter, which I don't want, so I'm just going to enter 0 for that, and then click OK. And it goes through pretty quickly and generates all these random breaks for your object, and then reassembles it into one nice cube again. And all these are pieces, and they do have an inner and an outer piece. They're not just a shell. It's not just the outside of the cube that it did that to. I'm going to undo that. And also the plugin, the first layer was my original cube. The second layer is my reassembled and broken up cube. I'm just going to turn off the eyeball for the first one and name this second layer called Cracked. Okay, and I'm just going to save this right now. This will be our object that we use. I'll call it cube. I got one going here. Cube underscore 2. Okay. Alright, so I'll send this over to layout. And I'll give myself about 150 frames to work with here. And okay, now I need a ground plane for this object to sit on. And so I'll go over to the items, add dynamic objects, collision. Since this will be the ground plane, I'll call it ground. And I don't want it to be a sphere type, so I'll go down and select a plane, and I'm going to take this radius level down to 0, and I'm going to place it just below the cube. Okay, so now I need to select my cube object, hit P for properties, dynamics, add dynamic, hard effects. Double click on that, and it defaults to, the piece mode defaults to parts, which is what we want, because the object that was reassembled in Modeler is made up of parts. Each one of those pieces is contiguous. It exists in its own and doesn't share the points with the neighboring pieces that are assembled around it. So that's good, and that's what this defaults to. So I want to set the gravity to -9.8, and over on the collision tab here, I want to check start by collision, and that'll allow the object to be sitting still. I'll be able to click my calculate for the dynamics, and the object will sit there until it's affected by a collision. Okay, now we need to add the collision object, so I'll go over to items again, add dynamic object collision. I'll just call it collision, and it'll just be a giant sphere like this, a little bit smaller maybe. Okay, and now I just need to position this guy. Hit T to move. I'm going to move it below the ground floor, and then in about 10 frames it'll shoot up and through this object. That should be pretty good. Okay. Alright, now I'm going to zoom out a little bit, give myself some space to see what's happening here when I calculate this. Okay, so alright, let's select our, actually I can go over to the modify tools. There's an IKB calculate, which is the same thing as selecting the object of the cube, the cracked cube, and hitting its properties and hitting calculate here. This calculate and this calculate do the same thing. One thing else I want to do is under the force tab for this cube, I just want to add some spinning to the pieces as they explode. So I'm going to, under the rotation field here, I'm going to enter 50%. Okay, I'm just going to close this down so it's out of my way, and I'll hit calculate here. So you can see that it calculates pretty quickly, and we have a nice range of stuff flying, and you can see that they're landing on our ground plane down there. Okay, boom. Alright. Okay, now one other thing I want to do is to be able to add some particles coming off of some of the pieces. So if we open up the properties panel again for hard effects for our cube object, if we go to the edit effects tab and we click on edit tool, we can highlight the path for each of the pieces that the hard effects has generated it for. And if under the edit node thing, field entry here, you can grab on this and scrub, and it'll highlight the different paths. Now this path is the center of each of the pieces. So if I was to add a particle emitter from the center of each piece, maybe that's what I want, maybe it's not. In this case, I kind of want to select one of the corners of one of the pieces and have some particles coming off of the corner of one of the pieces, not the center of the motion. So hit spacebar to drop that. So what I can do is, under the cube dynamics again, I'm going to add soft dynamics. Now what the heck am I doing here? Okay, double click on soft, go to the operator tab, and for operator 1 map, select none for that, and then hit hit calculate. And what it does is it goes through, and it doesn't look like it did anything, and in fact it hasn't altered the motion at all. But what it did do, let's open the soft effects, edit effects tab for soft effects, and click on the edit tool. What it did do was give me the points, how all the points are moving for each of those pieces. Now one thing I want to do is pick a piece that's kind of tumbling a lot, and maybe this guy here. What I'll do is I'll pick like the corner point, and you can already see this kind of different pattern. I can grab this and cycle through all the different nodes on that piece, and when I find one that I like, I actually kind of want a corner right there, and when I find one that I like, I'm going to come down to the commands field here and go make path, and that bakes out a null object with it's a null object that I'll be able to use as my particle emitter. Okay, so and while this is still active, I can go back to the soft effects and pick another piece out, maybe something that's kind of tumbling nicely like this guy up here, and I'll pick his corner. I'll say edit effects, make path, and maybe just one more. Let's see what else we got. Let's see. How about this guy down here? Go back to the edit effects for this. And maybe I'll just pick this guy here and make path. Okay, so I have 3 nulls that I've baked out. And I can go back to the soft effects for that cube, and I'm just going to uncheck this. If I leave it on here, not deleting it, I can still always turn this back on and come and bake out more paths if I want them to. So I'm just going to leave this here, but uncheck it. And I'm going to hit the space bar to drop and get myself out of this edit mode where all these yellow vertices are showing up. Okay. Alright, so I've got this kind of explosion happening. And I want to add some particles now pretty quickly. So I'm going to go and pick that first null object. And okay. Alright, let's go to the null, properties, dynamics, and select emitter. I'm just going to move this over a little bit off screen. Okay, so right now the emitter is kind of big and it's kind of flinging particles in a way that I don't really want. So just double click on that, and under the etc. tab, the parent motion I want to set to 0. Under the motion tab, I want to add a little vibration to the particles, so I set them at 1. And the size of this thing is a bit big. So under the generator tab, I'm just going to set 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. Okay, so we're getting kind of a path of these things going. Right. And another thing, they're kind of, some are being born before the explosion happens, and those guys are being hit by they're being flung in a manner that I don't really want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to about frame 6 in the animation, and under the generator tab, under birth rate, I'm going to, whoops, sorry, under the generator tab, under birth rate, I'm going to click on envelope, and I'm going to add a keyframe at frame 6 and make sure that's 100 particles there, and the one at frame 0 will be set its value to 0. Hit A to auto fit these in the graph editor. Now I'm going to right click and select both keyframes and go over to the incoming curve here and set them to stepped. So what happens is there will be no birth rate of particles until frame 6, in which it instantly turns to 100. Okay, so now we get, boom. Okay, let's go back into properties again, just tweak that a little bit. Hold down Control and slide that over maybe 2 more frames so that they're born at frame 8. Boom. Okay, that's good. Alright. Okay. So, one thing I want to do real quick is for that particular null, I want to go to its File tab, and I want to save this setting here. I'm just going to call it Q. Just kind of a quick temporary file. Because I want to add particles again onto null 2 properties. add dynamics, emitter. Now I want the same settings, so if I double click and go File, Load, and select Q, then I get the same particle settings. So again, go to the third null, add dynamics, emitter, double click, File, Load, Q, and what I have are three, there you go, three emitters that are happening, and those are pretty quick to set up. I'm using the same settings. You can go in and vary each one a little bit if you want. I'm just trying to get through this a little quicker here. Okay, now I just need to set up some hypervoxels on them to give them some color, because right now these won't render. They're just information for the next step. So I'll go over to my render tab up here, hypervoxels, and let's try and set this up to see this a little bit better. Okay. All right, so null 1, we'll highlight that and click activate. And under the geometry tab for particle size, first of all, we'll show particles, turn that on so we can see what we're getting. And under object type, we'll select sprite. And you can see that it's got a default size in here. And we can tweak that a little bit. First thing I want to tweak is the size of the particles. I don't want them to be quite so big when they're first born. So I want to go to texture, click on texture, select gradient for layer type. The input parameter will be the particle age, and up here at the top, the 0 parameter is when they're basically being born. So at that key, I want to have their value be a little smaller here. So they're maybe about this big when they're born. And then let's say at around frame 15, they're at about 100%. Let's say that that's good enough. Okay. I also, under the shading tab, they're a default gray right now. I kind of want them a little bit different than that. So again, I want to texture that, and layer type will set to gradient based on the particle age. And again, at the top where they're first born, I'm going to have them be kind of a bright yellow, and then a couple frames later they get kind of a dark fiery red, okay, a really bright obnoxious red, and then they'll taper off into kind of a thick black smoke. And you can kind of see this interactively, which is kind of cool. Alright, okay, let's say that's good enough. Okay, now another thing I want to do is I don't want this trail to kind of end the way it's ending like that. I want them to fade out a bit, the smoke to fade out. So I'm going to go to the opacity texture, layer type set to gradient based on particle age, and when they're first born it's 100% value, and let's say over the course of 30 frames they go invisible. So now it's more of a fading out, you see. Oh, seem to have moved a keyframe here. Well, because it's a keyframe, I'm just going to go to this one frame here and hit delete. I must have moved that by mistake. Okay. Alright, so that's basically what our hypervoxels will look like. And we'll click use texture on it. So that was all done to null 1. The good thing is we don't have to do that manually to the other two. I can just select this guy, hit copy, null 2, activate, paste, null 3, activate, paste, and we've quickly got 3. I'm just going to close this down. We've just made 3 plumes. Now you can go into each one and vary them up slightly, add a little more work than I'm doing here. Okay. Alright, next thing I want to do is I'm going to select my camera, which has been sitting here the whole time, and I just want to kind of move it down and away from where all these explosions are happening. And hit 6 to look through the camera, Y to rotate, and I just kind of want to get a view of what's going on here. Move back a little bit. Okay. Just trying to find a good spot for the camera to show the next step. Okay. Alright, I set a keyframe at 40. I'll set that at 0 and delete that key at 40. So now I just have a camera keyframe at 0. Okay, now if I click play, boom, I get kind of this explosion here. And it's kind of neat. It's pretty much what I was going for. But one thing, I want to have a little bit of camera shake to this. I can go into the camera keyframes and keyframe them manually myself, but I wanted to show you this plugin that comes with Lightwave called Jolt, which is a pretty good way of adding quick random camera movements to something. You don't have to add them just to camera. Jolt can work on objects also. But here I just want to use it on the camera. So select the camera, hit M for motion options, and go to add modifier, add Jolt, double click, and you get these keyframes tab and an events tab. Let me just close this for a second and scrub to where our explosion first happens. So boom, let's say around frame 6 or 7, we want our first shake to happen. Boom. Let's go to the Jolt modifier again, and this slider up here represents all the keyframes in my animation. So if I go to frame 6 and click create key, it'll set a jolt to happen there at frame 6. And down here are 3 presets: light, medium, heavy. I'll do a heavy preset. I'll click on that, and it enters some XYZ heading, pitch, bank variables in there. I'm going to zero out the X, Y, and Z ones. And now if we click play, we see we have an explosion and a camera shake when it first happens. And it's triggered at frame 6. So it's steady and then boom. Now there's this other piece that comes flying toward the camera, and boom, I want that one at frame 56 to have another jolt to the camera. So I'll go back in here, and I'll scrub this over to frame, let's go 57 here, create a key there, and that'll be a heavy hit also. And I'm going to zero these out, X, Y, and Z's, and click continue. And now when we play this back, we have boom, an initial shake, and then boom, another one when that piece hits near the camera. So that's a quick way of using Jolt to add some camera shake. I mean, I could have gone in with keyframes and done that, but the Jolt keyframes are actually easier to kind of slide around and add wherever you need them. Okay, so now all you need to do is just add a ground plane in, a real ground plane. This collision object ground plane won't render, so just add an object in, set up some lighting, and render out a scene, and you'll end up with something like this.